Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I do these decorative solder balls or beads or whatever. I don't do a lot of fancy decorative soldering, but I do these beads a lot, and I have gotten requests to show how I do it. So here we go. I always solder and do my decorative soldering with this 3.2 millimeter tip. But I know a lot of you have these larger 5 millimeter tips, so I attempted to show it both ways. Now, because I'm used to the smaller tip went a lot better than the larger tip, but I still achieved it, so it might be helpful for you. And I also showed gel flux versus paste flux. Personally, I didn't find a difference really between the two. They both gave good results. And then just today I was using Eagle solder, which is the 60/40. So let's see how it goes. Alright, so I'm starting with the Tiger's Eye gel flux. I am putting the flux on my solder seam, grabbing as much solder as my little 3.2 millimeter tip can hold, and then just so you can see how much solder I have on my tip, and then I'm touching it to the solder seam. I'm at 410 degrees. You can turn the heat down if you need to. As you can see, with how much solder I'm putting on, it's kind of looking a little oblong, like I'm pointing out there. So what you can do is you can just grab some more solder and you can put it right back on the bead, and it kind of reshapes it and adds a little more solder to make a nice round bead. You may or may not have to add more flux. I did not have to add more flux here. But see how round those beads are? Now, if you want smaller decorative beads, you want to grab less solder. And you want your iron to touch the solder seam so that your ball is melding into the solder seam, because if you make a cold bond, whereas if you just drop the solder bead on and it doesn't really adhere to the solder seam, it's going to pop off. So you want to make sure it really attaches. Okay, so now next I'm using the Noco Road Paste Flux. People always ask, what flux do you use? What solder do you use? And I wanted to just do a little experiment to see if there is a difference between the different fluxes. And so now I am just making my solder seam, adding more flux so that the decorative balls have something to adhere to. So this is when I want to space out my decorative beads evenly, I want to call it the rule of halves, where I put a dot in the middle and then I put a dot in between the next area and then the next area. I don't know if that made sense. But see how I'm adding more solder to the bead that I already laid because it looked a little oblong and I wanted more of a rounded bead. I also want to mention that if you plan to do a lot of decorative soldering, you could switch to a different solder that's like, I think the 6337 solder, because it sets up quicker, I believe, which makes it easier for decorative soldering. I just find the 60/40 works well for the little bit of decorative soldering that I do. So if you notice, I'm holding my iron tip perpendicular to the solder seam. So I grab the solder and then I'm attaching it with like the corner tip of the soldering iron. I find for me that's the easiest way to get more of a ball shape. If I have my chisel tip flat, then the decorative solder bead is just gonna like meld into the seam and just look like a big blob. So now I'm going in between all these with little dots, so I'm using a lot less solder. And sometimes, so see how I'm kind of wiggling it back and forth to make sure it really sticks? Sometimes if the bead just attaches very quickly, I don't trust it, so I'll go back and kind of melt it a little more to make sure it's really stuck to that solder seam. Okay, so that was gel and paste with my 3.2 millimeter tip. I didn't really notice a difference between the different fluxes. I never use this larger tip, so this is going to be a challenge. But I like experiments, so let's see how I can do. Okay, I'm grabbing my solder to start adding the dots. Okay, already we're a little oblong. I don't know if it's because my solder seam is too hot still. I didn't let it cool down at all. But here we go, adding more dots. Adding more dots. Yep, oblong. We'll see if we can fix that. That one looks okay. Alright, so they all look pretty oblong. I'm going to add more solder in to try to make them rounder, which is also, since I'm adding more solder, it's going to make them bigger. So they'll be nice, big, round dots. That one's going to be really big. Oh my. Okay, now I'm going to try to do smaller ones. And you can tap it a few times to get the size that you want. Ooh, that one was kind of big. But again, you want to use the corner tip of your chisel. Not too bad. Definitely a little bit more difficult with the larger tip. Okay, last I'm gonna do the gel flux. And then we have the large tip again. Ooh. You can see it really melting in, but it's trying to flow and spread, so that's why you get the oblong shape. Usually I will solder the front of a piece, then solder the back of the piece, then flip it back over and do my decorative soldering last so that the seams have time to cool down a bit. Because if your solder seams are too hot and then you try to add extra solder, the solder's just going to want to like flow into the hot solder seam. So now I'm trying different ways of holding my iron. Yeah, that one didn't turn out, so we're going to smooth that out and retry. So now if I held my tip flat instead of on the corner, and you saw it just kind of like meld into the seam. Oh, more solder there. So if you want smaller dots, you want to tap it quicker onto the solder seam, but you want to make sure that it's still adhering. Oh dear. Better fix that. I struggled with this large tip. Oh my gosh. That's enough. So that's the extent of my decorative soldering. So here's just a closer look at the different results. First we have the small tip with the gel flux, then the small tip with the paste flux, and then I try my hand at the larger tip with gel flux, and the larger tip with the paste flux. I didn't really enjoy the large tip, not gonna lie.